Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to have you all again on this cycle of webinars. This is our 7th webinar, 6 open to the public and 1 that was not open, unfortunately. So I would like to tell you today that this cycle of webinars is a part of the framework of some courses that have been organized by the Latin American School of Protected Areas for the University for International Cooperation. And they have been coordinated through the Parks Network, Red Parques in Spanish, which you might be familiar with. It consists of 23 systems of protected areas, national protected areas in Latin America. And it is today coordinated by Mexico. And this cycle of webinars has been financed with the support of the cooperation of the Amazon Protected Areas, known as the IAPA project led by FAO, and also a part of this project we have EOICN South, WWF, and UN Environment. So thanks to the support of the IAPA project are the coordination of Red Parques, and also thanks to the participation of a very special group, which is the team working governance for the Amazon Vision, which is a very important component of Red Parques. As you can see, there is a series of institutions behind this webinar that have made it possible to turn this into a reality. So on behalf of all the institutions, we would like to welcome you to this cycle, and we would like to thank you for your presence, and particularly on behalf of Latin American School of Protected Areas for the IAPA project and Red Parques. We would like to thank especially all those people that have prepared presentations and a series of talks that will be shared this morning, including practices. Today we have 2 groups that are here to share, and Cristina is going to introduce them. They are going to share their integrated management of the territory for these protected areas in different countries. So I think that this is a very interesting experience related to a topic that nowadays is part of modern management, as we can call it, and a part of this integration of these protected areas to the landscape. So today we'll learn how they can be integrated to the landscape in multiple countries. In this case, we're talking about 3 countries. This is a trinational, and we'll learn about the role that they play on the management of all these processes. We have a big group of speakers that are going to talk to us, and we have many stakeholders as well. So I would like to invite you all to let us know by using the chat where you come from, your name, and I would also like to invite you to the last webinar that will take place next Friday, which is going to be very interesting as well, because it will be about use agreements. So without further ado, and after these welcoming remarks, we go back to Cristina for the introductions. Thank you. Thank you, Stanley. And as you said, we are going to take a look at the integration of border protected areas in the environmental land use processes. And the idea is to share some cases and the challenges that we have when we are near the border, according to this modern vision of protected areas. And it also implies different management processes that are more challenging because we have other institutions, for example, the ministries of foreign affairs, and it is a challenge for all the managers of protected areas that are near the border between two or more countries in order to be able to articulate more action. And we have a couple of cases that will be shared today so we can get to know more about these experiences, about this articulation, that is a cross-border articulation, in order to improve the management capabilities and the impact of all these integrated areas on the territories and the landscape scale as well. So as Stanley said, we're going to have a couple of cases today, and this is today's order of the day. And first, we're going to have a presentation on the contribution of protected areas to border territorial governance, advances, lessons learned, and challenges of the process for the structuring of this associated scheme with the Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru from 2013 to 2020. And they are a group of people, so I am not going to introduce them all because they have donated their time and they have prepared together among representatives of these three countries this presentation. And then we're going to have our second presentations, which is integrated management and participative management actions on the region of the border, Madre de Dios, Peru, Acre, Brazil, and Pando, Bolivia. And this is also a group of colleagues from these three countries that have organized this presentation. And we're going to have all this information presented to us, including all the experiences on these two regions. And of course, later on, we're going to have, as always, a Q&A session, and then we'll close the event at 10 a.m. Costa Rican time. So if you have questions, please write them down on the chat so that we can start looking at them. So if you agree, maybe we can start with the first presentation. While I introduce the group, maybe we can start screen sharing. The first presentation that I just mentioned is going to be presented by Gisela Paredes from Colombia, César Mauricio Salcedo on associative topics from the National Planning Department in Colombia. From 2013 to 2018, Andrés Mendoza from Putumayo and in charge of regional management. Luis Borborge from Ecuador. Amaro Socola from Puerto del Carmen. And also from Ecuador. So thank you. I would like to thank all our colleagues for being today with us, and especially Gisela for coordinating all this effort and for preparing the group. So we have 30 minutes for your presentation, and I will let you know when you have 10 minutes left so that you can start organizing your time. So again, thank you, and the floor is yours. Gisela? We can take a look at your screen, but we cannot hear you. Can you hear me now? Yes. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As it has been said, this is going to be a presentation of a process that has not been completed yet. So we'll tell you about our advance. And this is a contribution of protected areas to border territorial governance. We're going to share advances, lessons learned, and some challenges that we currently have as part of this process. And we are a big group, so I will start now. We are going to let you know why this associated process is a strategy that we have used, and we'll also tell you about the methodology and all our achievements and challenges as well, so that you can take all this into mind. And I apologize because one of our colleagues is on the jungle, so he's trying to connect by using his cell phone. So first, I would like to tell you that Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru entered into a trinational plan as a result of a local initiative of the parks, the heads of Teófilo, Luis Borbón, Jefferson, and back then Carlos Sanz. And this scaled at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it became a memorandum of understanding for the sustainable development of the corridor protected areas of La Paya, the reserve area of Huepi, which is now a natural park, and also Cuyabeno, which is a forest reserve. And the purpose is to have a model for conservation and regional management that would allow for social sustainable development and incidence in sectorial and political policies. And in addition, this program also has some actions when it comes to the management of protected areas and buffer zones, and also social participation, strengthening of the conservation corridor, the land use planning, and also the strengthening of institutional capacities. This started back in 2011, and with this initiative at local level, those who were sharing or who would like to greet all these park rangers that are also present in the territory. And it is also important to mention that under this understanding, we started working on this association scheme. But why? You might think, well, you have been working on the protection of these areas, and why now land use planning? Well, because as you can see in the map, we have the protected areas. Hola, sorry for interrupting. Can you please speak a little slower? Yes, okay, I'll try. Well, I apologize for speaking so fast because we were doing that because of time. But as I was saying, we have nine countries that share the Amazon biome. And as you know, the Amazon accounts for 20% of drinking water in the country, but 50% of this biome has been declared as protected area or indigenous territory, where we have over 120 different populations. But the Amazon is under great pressure when it comes to deforestation and illegal things like illegal mining, fires, and mega projects that have no environmental context or cultural one. And I don't know, as you've seen that as part of this land use planning projects, we have an empty place. This is Leguizamo in Colombia. And what you see in white is the national park. So that in theory is empty, because it seems like nothing's happening because it is a protected area. And in that sense, it is also important not to talk only about the landscape, but also the territory. So how would this look in the context of the territory, where we have ethnic communities, local communities, and ministries of foreign affairs, and we have surveillance, control, monitoring as part of the planning. So it's necessary to say that when it comes to the border, these territories are alive. These border territories have a natural and cultural particular thing, which is that the border does not divide but unites, because we're brothers and these ecosystems go beyond the political boundaries, basins, and ecosystems and culture as well. Also important is to learn how it all started. These are some pictures for the whole process. So back in 2012, we have this analysis matrix of all protected area, the different municipalities, departments, and we went through a whole process where we analyzed approximately 20 variables to see what was going on outside of these protected areas when it comes to titles, mining, roads, collective territories, indigenous populations. So we started prioritizing of the areas of work. We have 11 protected areas near the border. So you might say, well, but to this side of the border, we have a legislation. So what goes on the other side when it comes to land use planning? Well, we started internally, and this is how we started looking at the competencies. And in our case, it's the National Department of Planning, or OCEPLAN, OCEPLARES in Peru and Ecuador, where they are taking care of all these processes for the development of the country, but we had other institutions in charge of risk, agrarian topics, but we also have the ministries of the environment, national park, environmental regional authorities, the Ministry of Housing and territorial institutions, and with which one of them should we work on this? Well, in addition, we work with institutions in charge of generating official information. In our case, that's Agustin Codazza, the institute, and based on that, we generate a strategy that is also political, operational, to allow us to see how these protected areas should be a part of this land use planning. So we went over all the experiences worldwide, and it was not included because it was only at the ecosystem and landscape level, but not as part of the land use planning. So part of this process that we have been working on has allowed us to identify that the focuses that we most use or approaches to work in land use is the rights, the rural or urban, the ecosystem, which is something that we have on biological diversity, but also risk management and climate change. In addition, we had to do something on the territory because this could not be only in theory. And this is when we started structuring some pilot cases on protected areas when it comes to territorial management. But today I'm going to talk about one of these 8 pilot cases, which is the one that we have near the border in Leguizamo. These are some of the institutions that have been a part of this process. But the main purpose for these pilot cases was to have concrete cases that would allow us, based on the coherence and synergies, to take a look at how these different tools for planning were used on the same territory. And on one hand, we were able to socialize what was being generated when it comes to policies and land use planning at national level, but at local level, at department level, to talk and go all the way to the national level to understand land use planning for protected areas. Are they included or not? And also important is to strengthen the capacities and learn about local initiatives. And this way, we have had an incidence in the national policy for land use planning in Colombia. And one of the pilot cases was precisely this associative scheme for these areas in the border, which is the one that I have here. And these are all the institutions that participated. And this started with an idea that we have with Cesar Mauricio Salcedo from the National Department of Planning, and Cesar Sandino from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Colombia, and national parks, and also taking into consideration this tri-country program to see if we could advance when it comes to the management, but within this context. And this is when we started working to see how we can visualize the borders as part of the national policy for land use planning in Colombia in order to have an incidence in other policies. And also it was necessary to talk with the parish in Ecuador and also Fimarcas in Peru and Leguizamo as municipality. It's not just their own dialogue from protected areas and conservation, but all the institutions that you are going to look at. Well, the work phases that we have gone through, well, we have the institutional preparation and diagnose, vision and regulation of the territory, revision and adjustment of the land use plans, and then the associative scheme. We started with this scheme because we saw that there was a trajectory when it comes to the articulation between Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador that could be strengthened. However, we wanted to take a look at all of these, for example, so how can you do that? Well, when we are on a plane and they tell you to put on your mask and then assist the others, well, this is the same because we have all the different stages when it comes to the institutional parts. We have coordinators, financing, information, and knowledge for this, for political decision making. But who should we train? Well, ourselves, the park rangers, the authorities on the territory, and those in charge at national level of the development and land use planning, and the ministries of foreign affairs. So also the members of the academia that must be familiar with this. So also the idea is to generate information and knowledge. And also, how can we take a look at this vision, what is going on, and and uh, also other ecosystems that are strategic. And well, this is my cat. As you can see, I have nature with myself here. And how we're going to work in all this risk management that is also important. And for Colombia, well, when it comes to the land use plan, we needed to go over the legislation, the zoning, and all of this. And I would like to mention here that sometimes people say that we have this area of influence or buffer zone in the parks. Well, but first we need to go and take a look at the park because this is what we'll interact first with, and also the municipalities. And there was something that was structured by Cesar Mauricio on how to work on an associative scheme for land use planning, which we'll explain later on. And then we started by linking all of this from environmental planning with everything we have as tools. We have territorial development and all these association schemes, but also planning for land use and also the different institutions. Some of the achievements, well, first, we all stakeholders sat down together on the territory, and that is something that is really important. But also, we were able to take to the territory the national institutions and special committees and committees on land use planning in Bogota in order for people to get to know what we were doing, what the mayors thought about these border areas that in general are over 500 kilometers away from Bogota or 1,000 kilometers from Lima or 300 kilometers from Quito. And these territories are far away and have no voice most of the time. And we were also able to get into an agreement with the governments of Puerto del Carmen, the municipality of Soplin Vargas and Leguizamo for conservation purposes. And we were able at national level to work in order for these border municipalities. I have one here in order to have national public policies for multiple purposes and other national plans. And also we were able to have an incidence. And also we have different policies between the different countries, different times, and different ways to do things. So we came up with this work plan, which is for all the institutions, and the National Service of Protected Areas of Peru, Parques Colombia, and all the stakeholders and ministries of foreign affairs, and to take a look at all the tools and also for public policies and planning in order to have an incidence and to harmonize all these policies. And internally, I would like to tell you that this so-called associative scheme, which was an idea, is already a law in Colombia. And since 2019, these associative schemes for the border allowed to have a platform in order to have this better. And we were also able to see other things because we didn't know the worth of these land use plans, and we needed to coordinate. And it turns out, but we didn't even know about the cost or the things that we must do.
For strengthening capacity, I'm going to grant the word to my colleague Cesar. We've also strengthened capacities at the local level, from the department level, the regional, national, and border level that we're discussing, combining scales. But it was also an issue of taking national entities to the local level, because it's important that the people who do planning, if you work on the 16th floor, of a building in Bogota, you can't be planning things on the border. A few lessons learned. Of course, the political administrative division of the countries is different for each country. In Colombia, you have 32 departments and 1,103 municipalities. For Peru, 24 departments and 196 provinces and 1,874 districts. For Ecuador, it's 7 regions, 24 provinces, 221 cantons, and 1,156 municipalities. So there's a diversity, not just at the natural level, but also at the political level. And also, as far as the instrument for territorial planning, there's a variety as far as the instruments involved. And to standardize the first, I need to know what instruments each country is carrying forth. I want to say that based on the Council of Ministers, recently there was a change in these figures that you see on screen. Also, in the category of protected area, we have diversity. We have protected areas, but they're not always the same protection nor the restrictions for use. They vary from country to country. But my dear Stanley, we need to look beyond the landscape. We need to look at the territory. We need to look at the landscape and nature, but not just because we say, oh, the Coast Guard, no. We need to look outwards, but outwards, inwards as well, because we need to be capable. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the people who work for the parks, the academics, the territorial authorities, we need to be able to sit down and learn mutually to get into the jungle. That's what we've managed to do. We've also understood that we need a differential focus for these areas where it's not possible to homogenize and simplify them, because this would generate the risk of natural and cultural extinction. There's a different territorial occupation model in the border areas. There's some fundamental elements in the territorial ordering, which is the connectivity issue, but not just connectivity infrastructure, but connectivity with the ecosystem, the basins, the transportation, and the fact that ancestral knowledge, the territorial regulation, and this outlook of the specifics of the communities is very important. It's important to mention that co-leadership is necessary, and I wanted to mention one of my colleagues from Park, Sandra Rodriguez, who's also been working on climate change. And we're speaking not of projects, but of processes. We realized that there was more than 130 projects, and we with the NC Plata process. So we're thinking, what was the logic? We're going to continue looking at things from the window of the airplane, or are we going to get into the jungle to support the processes? What's important is how we can incorporate diversity in territorial structuring so that we can have an impact, so that urban development planning can be in line with cultural diversity, and that allow to decrease socio-environmental conflicts and to avoid the syndrome of the empty assembled in the plans. The work on the network, of course, from the acknowledgement and the sharing of lessons learned. And here, as I had mentioned it the other day, the topic that together we are all capable of more. I wanted to grant the word of my colleague Cesar Mauricio. This from Marisa Willinger. This is to focus the attention in favor of integration and not the isolation of efforts, and the potential to articulate efforts and the lines of thinking of local governments and national governments, and also protected areas and for the protection of biodiversity. Cesar Mauricio, I think you finished presenting. Thank you very much, Gisela. Based on what Gisela just mentioned, I will tell you a little bit about the experience that we had at the time at the national level of this planning exercise. I wanted to clarify something. I'm an independent contractor and I've been working on different topics, but for the era between the year 2013 and the year 2018, I was spearheading the promotion of the regional integration in Colombia. And when Gisela proposed this exercise precisely with the person from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because at the time there was a debate in the country on how we're going to really spearhead this possibility, we found the effort that National Parks was doing, and we spoke with Gisela about this integration process. And one fundamental aspect is that this process will involve the trinational project, which placed before us a feasibility issue. And there were other two circumstances involved as well. First of all, we found that there was a population that was very varied, different ethnic groups, etc., that had settled there and that were acknowledged as not fragmented, but rather as a territory. They shared an experience. And so it's important in the presentation it was mentioned that the concept of the territory is the spatial environment where these relationships and these conflicts were happening. And let's say these people were acknowledged as part of this territory. And the third fundamental issue that we found when we were working on this exercise was represented by the fact that there was political will by the people who were doing the public management. And there were a number of stakeholders involved in this. In all of this exercise, there's another aspect, which is to start to envision regional facts, these de facto elements, these de facto issues that allowed us to define whether there was the possibility of doing regional integration processes. Now, in Colombia specifically, territorial association, which has its legal reference or regulatory reference in 1454, the organic law for territorial structuring, expresses itself as a correlation of the territorial structuring in administration. By going into this process, the first big surprise we found is that we had all of the conditions to properly work on this structure. But the main difficulty was the fact that the nation was in many ways lesser than, because the country had been structured under a completely different logic in terms of budgets and planning. And what do I mean by this? That the planning system and the investment system in the country were, in general, understood from the municipal perspective and the department perspective. So, despite the fact that there was some progress in recent years in relation to all of the regional processes, just a year or two ago, a law was passed for administrative regions as a territorial entity. There were some progress. And so the planning system is still very weak. And that has been one of the main obstacles that needs to be overcome. However, you discussed this initially. The additional difficulty that exists around this topic is that we are planning. We need to connect things from the perspective of each country. But in addition to this, we also need to align things internally among territories at the government level, but also at the population level within that territory. I would like to finish because I know that the other colleagues are also waiting to participate. I want to make a very general conclusion, and then there is a link between the territorial processes, those de facto processes, and the institutional challenge that the national and subnational governments must do in light of this reality that they're facing. And if this is not resolved, mainly in border territories, especially, gives way to all of these things that Gisela showed in her presentation related specifically that, and they tell her, look, these things can worsen. So the invitation is, as workers on public policy, we need to see in this an opportunity to understand cost-benefit analysis of what would represent an alternative for the management of border areas along these. I would like to grant the word to the other colleagues so that they can also continue. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Cesar. Yes, I just wanted to let the group know that we only have 10 minutes left so that they can take it into account among those of you left. Yes, thank you. Andres is okay if Amaro speaks first and then you? Correct, no problem. Amaro, please go ahead. Turn on your microphone. Can you hear me there? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Maru, we can't hear you clearly.
Frontera norte de Ecuador territorio y lo que ve por parte de poder comunicación. Sin embargo, esto queda simplemente en un enunciado.
But this is just left in a law because of the reason that what was determined there as far as the structuring among the different state levels, for example, in Ecuador at the internal level, the region, province, and the various municipal levels are involved. But far from that, or if politically we are able to do this structuring, it would stay at the national level. But the international levels, like the border areas, are different, and they're not being dealt as such. The needs, the real experience of the people who live in the border, both Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, have shared needs, have shared potential, but they are not being seen as a whole. So in the meetings we held, and the expectation that was captured at the time, which is still pending, is to continue with this effort of territorial structuring, seen as under the reality. We have the Putumayo River, which is sailed by Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador. And we have similar productions in all three countries. There are some international regulation, but there's no concrete effort to leverage the resources located therein. Because from the municipality of Putumayo and Puerto del Carmen, we had proposed 3 pillars for development: environmental protection, which has made a lot of progress; economic social development, which is not perceived from that perspective; and human mobility. These 3 pillars for development, we thought that working in the development of territorial ordering, we could specify things a little bit further, especially the topic of conservation through the Paya Reserve in Colombia, as well as the Wembe Triangle in Ecuador. Good efforts have been done, but we still need to internalize things at the community level. In order to leverage production as it exists there, the whole commercialization, we have Puerto del Carmen as an outlet to the territory of Ecuador, another country. It's the easiest path through the land. And the goal is to build a port there, to declare Puerto del Carmen as a trade port, and through this mobilize resources to the international markets. Then to develop infrastructure to generate added value to the production, similar production in Peru and Ecuador. What is the focus that the municipality has for the economic development? In this case of Ecuador, which is the province council, the central level, the Ministry of Livestock and Agriculture. The only thing they have is advisory, but not the resources to implement this effort. There are several international agreements, but that only exist in writing. They're not grounded because there's no approach to the territory. It's not being viewed from a joint perspective. We're not taking into account the potential of all three countries, nor their reality. On the social side, we also have pretty much a weakness on the issue of healthcare and education. This area has been quite abandoned in education. Why not to leverage the closest territory with the best conditions to generate these social services that could give a better quality of life to the population of all three countries? We shouldn't look at Peru and Ecuador individually, but we would look at all three countries to figure out where we can give the best benefit to all three countries, to the communities that are most impacted by in all three countries. On the other hand, to build the added value, a culture for added value for production. We have similar production in all three countries. Why shouldn't we envision things territorially for all three countries based on the strongest production on each area or on how to diversify production? Maybe we can leverage the territory for all three countries in a joint manner and generate infrastructure that can generate added value or conditions for raw materials that are not sold, where the broker has greater incentive than the producer. Another reality in Putumayo, every year we have floodings and there are big losses in production. And there's even loss of human lives. So we need to think on how to benefit by generating the conditions for human life, for the mobility of human beings of Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia through the Putumayo River, and how to reach the land area, which is Puerto del Carmen. By the Putumayo municipality, all conditions and all facilities to continue along this process. And thank you, Gisela, to really promote all of this effort. And I remember, as we said in several meetings, with the will to continue and look at the border of all three countries as harmonized, working for a common good, working for the benefit of human beings through the conservation of the environment, through creating health conditions, through creating appropriate production, through different activities that the human beings carry out, but in a harmonized territory that it does not just remains in strategic planning, in territorial planning. We need to look at things not just from the window of the airplane, but actually get down into the jungle and look at the reality. Thank you very much. And I wanted to grant the word to the rest of my colleagues. Thank you, dear Amaro. As you can see, the call. I invite Andres Mendoza right now. Luis Borbon was saying. And let's see if we can manage to connect because he's having problems. Andres, can you turn on your camera, please? Okay, we are on time. We can give it a few more minutes. We have Andres and Luis still missing. So we can finish with Andres. Okay, Andres, is it okay? Maybe it can be 5 minutes. Yes, yes. I'll have to do it just by speaking because I can't share my screen. I have to ask your permit to let me show you some cartography. The exercise that we were mentioning with Gisela for a few years, since 2014, is to start planning together, not just be the authority that has a jurisdiction on a specific territory, but rather start understanding that the territory depends on other people and that other people depend on us. The exercise is precisely identifying what is happening in the territory from the outside so that we can start planning outward bound. For the Putumayo department, we need to see it as a convergence point for different environmental factors, for different stakeholders that operate here and that migrate to other territories, impacting the park and also the other national authorities. As part of this, we need to take into account the need for resources for this area of the Amazon is increasing more and more. This also promoted by many illegal stakeholders with activities such as deforestation, illegal mining, illegal crops that impact directly and indirectly the nation and the other protected areas that are located in the basin of the Putumayo River and the Caquetá Basin, which are also border areas. Keeping this into account, it's important to start planning a different strategy involving the national level, the department level, and local level, but also together with other authorities that are located on the other side of the border. This is what we have been doing, participating in the Colombia-Ecuador border area, and this involves brothership agreements between Colombia, between different departments and provinces, but now we also have the possibility to work at the canton and municipal level. As part of all of this, with the complexity of activities that are carried out for planning in the territory, it's important to look at coordination effort between different stakeholders that work on planning, but on building tools as well, because everybody works on its own side. And with the few resources we have, we're not effective. Effective will be achieved in a strategy that builds capacities for communities. Because as we learned from the national parks, with the Leguizamo area, with the La Paya National Park, they brought capacity building to communities. And this allowed to say at the national level, look, we're going to involve a natural conservation project. But they said, okay, yes, 400 families, yes. But if it's only 80, then nobody wants to participate. So we need to have the capacity from the foundation to push upwards, to push towards the institutional, the municipal or national level, or even international level, because that's how it's happening. Yes? 2 minutes? Okay, ready. Sorry, another microphone turned on. But yeah, 2 minutes. Thank you. So do I finish there? You have 2 minutes more if you want to close. Finish, Andres. This exercise will involve or is involving a lot of people. The idea is between all of us to make this a reality. We need to access international cooperation like Ecuador or Peru does, or even as Colombia's tried, so that we can truly strengthen these figures to truly control the development that is being generated based on the possibility between an intermodal corridor. And there are illegal groups that try to avoid the controls of state authorities. And so I think that's it so far. Thank you. Christina, just in closing, the call is from Chris. It's not just the people in protected areas. As you saw it, we have different territorial authorities and national authorities that are involved in the territorial structuring, but it's a process. We go where we're headed and we continue in investigating action and we push forward. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Gisela, for coordinating the participation of your group. And well, it's very interesting to hear the voice of the stakeholders in understanding the complexity of the territory from the different roles that each one of you plays. So we want to thank you very much for your provisions, for setting up this presentation and for sharing it with us. So if it sounds okay to you, we're now going to grant the word to Lisette Moreja Vivian, who you're now going to share screen, right? Guillermo, while we start your presentation, I'm going to take a minute to introduce you. Guillermo is a social anthropologist from the University of Puebla. He's been the National Director of Conservation International in Bolivia and also of the San Andres of Bolivia, La Paz, being Director of the Research Center for La Pando University in Pando, Bolivia, the Sustainable Development Secretariat of the Pando area of the Bolivian Amazon, and coordinator for the interinstitutional platform, Economía Amazona. Also, coordinator for the Center for the Stanford University in the United States. So Guillermo, thank you very much for being here in the framework of the presentation for this initiative. So we grant you the word and you can go ahead and share your screen. It loaded, we cannot hear you yet. You need to put your presentation in full screen mode. Guillermo, you need to turn on your microphone. We can't hear you, Guillermo. Your microphone is muted. Okay, you hear me? Okay, let's see. And you're now sharing it. We can see the presentation that Mercedes was doing. I can't make it full screen. Below, Guillermo. Yes, but below precisely is where all of the mess is. How can I get out of there? You can pull the tab where the people are there and place it somewhere else. What do I do to get out of here? There you are. Yes, now you can see it. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, well, Mercedes is ready. We're all part of the process. I wanted to mention what this initiative is. This is in the border between Peru. And this has been going on for more than 20 years. And it's a group that generates ideas, that generates proposals, and essentially it's a civil society.
This is a group that was created to work on sustainable development and the impact in the region of this so-called mega project like roads, hydroelectric plants, that are the cause of anxiety and many other problems in the region. For example, from 2012 and 2015, everything was flooded. And this is a bridge. This is Brazil. And in here we have Peru. So this type of problems are the results that forced a group of civil society that basically consisted of researchers from 3 countries started this research and study of the region, and then come with a proposal for solutions within sustainable development. And that is the only thing that we had back then. So we started working on that, and also analyzing public policy. So the idea was to come up with ideas and mobilize the border population in this area. This is our logo. This is a representation of the 3 countries. We have Madre de Dios, Acre, where the far away place where the devil left his jacket, as they say in Spanish, and a very unprotected area. And since then, we came up with this structure that started generating different topics like environmental conservation and many other things. And we had an organized civil society, unions, NGOs, and these are all the protected areas. So I think that this is very important when it comes to environmental protection, sustainable use of resources, and protected areas. And when it comes to equality, we have also problems with roads and all its implication, and also wood exploitation. And our STAR project, which is chestnuts or Brazil nuts. And this is part of the influence in the region. This is a very strong region in spite of being isolated. And it's very big. And we have 3 institutions that co-manage this part that has 80% of the whole biodiversity. So for now, the environmental impact is still slow compared to the extension of the territory. And this is the road that joins all these sites. And as part of this, we have the protected areas, and this is what I'm going to talk to you about. Mainly, as I said from the beginning, what the reason why we're together is because we wanted to minimize the risk, because we are currently breathing all the smoke of the forest fires. And that has resulted in health complications, production problems, political problems as well. We have a very high migration rate. So in 20 times, it has grown 3 times, and mainly near the roads, of course, and of course near the river. So this impact has resulted in this lack of balance and emergencies. So I think that risk management is quite important. And I think that this would be like the core of what we need to do. Regarding what we have on screen, which are the integrated action in the border, well, we had some financing to establish a network of early alerts of the Bakri River. So we know when the river is growing, when it's about to flood, so that we can take immediate action, and this way to prevent this destruction of forests, mainly in this area. And almost every year we have floods. So we have been working with the different states and civil defense. And the idea is to take early action, which is important to try and detect on time or in anticipation what we'll have to face in order to come up with a solution beforehand. This is the Acre River. And on these points that I'm currently indicating on screen, this is a part of the river, and this is an area that we have currently monitored in order to have early detection. So what joins us? Well, the high ethnical and cultural diversity, the tropical forest with a high biological diversity, but it's much more than that. We have the story because this is a region that is very important and was established by prior to the Castanera. And also we had this boom. And I think that this is a territory that has been disputed by all the countries. And because we started with some exports of rubber, and we had some war problems between entrepreneurs of three countries that are going to be at the end of the day the ones to determine our boundaries, with so many people involved. And sometimes if they set the boundaries, they had the family on the other side. So this started a very interesting exchange, because I think that everyone there has relatives in Peru or Brazil or the other way around. So we share a common history, and we would like to envision a common future. So I think that, among other things, this is the reason why this initiative has been so important for us. And of course, it's going to have an influence on everyone. So what happens with the protected areas? Because I think that this is what this is all about at the end. Well, this is a part of Alto Cruz National Park, and we have a small case study. And first, I would like to talk about these areas near the border. I think that we have all these processes in which the civil society would like to look for solutions to all the ecological problems in the region, but also there is an articulation about how we started with this area and its implications. Well, quickly, in 1969, we have the Cartagena Agreement that was signed in Cartagena. And since then, they started talking about the development of border regions. And then in 1978, we have a treaty on Amazon cooperation. And we have this treaty, and since then, all these countries started generating possibilities for research, financing, and integration near the border. And in 1993, we have a treaty for Amazon cooperation entered into by the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of Bolivia and Peru. And this was meant towards the binational development. And last, we have Decision 501 signed by the members of the Andean Council of Ministers of Foreign Affairs in Valencia, Venezuela, where they established the areas for border integration, for sustainable development and border integration. And we have already developed some policies at national level when it comes to the concept of sustainability. So I think that this decision was entered into to try and implement the border integration. So This is a part of this process of sustainable development, and it's comprehensive. And this is the area. We can see here some of the environmental impact, and the strongest one in this area is deforestation. And this is part of the region that I'm trying to show you in this map. And I would like to tell you quickly about what is going on these protected areas. This is the national reserve that has been increasing, and it is the result of a land use plan. We had a plan for the use of soil, and then we established this area as a protected area. In the beginning, it was bigger, then it was reduced, and then again, it grew. So I think that this is a very important ecosystem in where we have populations on the inside, but it is still a protected area. And in addition, it is also a reserve, a forest reserve, but also generates the use of wood inside the territory, because they have an important production on behalf of peasants, and they also grow Brazil nuts on this reserve, because there are a lot of nuts here, chestnuts, and that is a part of the use of these resources for the reserve. There is no wood exploitation. I mean, it cannot be taken out unless you have a special permit. For example, if you want to build like a canoe or a dwelling house, but nothing else. All other uses are restricted. And on the other side, exactly, beyond the border, because this is the border, this is just a line that divides an ecosystem in two. And here we have the reserve on one hand in Peru for the use of this ecosystem, but under another management category. And in Bolivia, we have a protected area or reserve, and we also have an area for the for forest use, but not for wood. So you can see here what happens. These are the concessions, because as I said, we have many of these knots, and this is an area of use where they have these chestnuts, and in here we have an illegal path where they smuggle wood. I just wanted to let you know that we do not see your pointer for whatever reason. Well, between the reserve, the protected area, and the forest for a permanent extraction in Peru, there are some smuggling corridors where they take out the wood, and this is from the regional government of Madre de Dios, so it's an official map in where we see these illegal roads where they smuggle this wood. And even though we have this binational ecological territoriality, we have a serious problem when it comes to the management categories. And thus, it is fundamental to work on the concept of land use planning for all these areas. And what are the problems that we come across? Well, our colleagues already explained during the prior presentation that in Bolivia, we have this land use plan, which is a general plan, and we also have a plan for the use of soil and the exploitation of the territory, where they have all these reserves and different categories of management. But in Peru, we have ecological reasons. So this is the reason why this area is dedicated for non-wood use or concessions for chestnuts. So these are some of the problems that we needed to face. These are our common problems as part of this process for the integration of protected areas near the border. And we need to define the management categories, and we need to learn more about these different concepts like land use planning, ecosystems, and sometimes we do not come to an agreement because we have talked to the ministers of foreign affairs. And for the case that I'm currently showing, we have only been able to, I mean, at the border areas to generate this cooperation at the border where we can discuss all these topics. And has been the case for the past years, but unfortunately, not much progress has been made. First, because not even when they started with the land use plan, well, it was not for the exploitation of the territory. So this is why they don't have like this zoning. So it has an impact when it comes to the exploitation of the territory. And on the Peruvian side, however, this concept is completely different. So there are some contradictions that are preventing us from establishing these protected areas that are together, that share some boundaries and some categories. Well, that is everything on my behalf. Thank you. Thank you, Guillermo, for your presentation. So we would like to ask Flavia. Flavia, are you ready? Yes, I am. So maybe we can start sharing your screen. I'll introduce you. You're going to make your presentation in Portuguese, right? So I'm going to introduce you in Spanish, and if you do not speak Portuguese, please bear in mind that you need to go to the interpretation icon in order to listen in English or Spanish. So we are going to listen to Flavia de Souza, a forest engineer from the University of Brasilia with a master's in tropical sciences. And she's part of the program of biodiversity at the Botanical Gardens of Rio de Janeiro. And she's currently a specialist from the Secretariat of the Environment in Brazil. And she has also been the head of the division of protected areas in Acre since 2013. So thank you for being with us today. So you have 10 minutes for the two presentations. So we can take a couple more minutes, but please bear this into mind. Thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to say welcome to you all, and I'm going to start my presentation to talk about this continuity of these protected areas in Peru and Brazil, in the case of Acre. That represents approximately 6 million hectares. And on this area, we have these areas on these locations where we have the national park, and that this is a common area that has a great particularity, and they are similar, we could say, as conservation areas. And we have Arsenio, Rafael, and they all took part of a meeting where they didn't have these topics at the beginning. So they met during this casual encounter. It was not nothing program, but this was the beginning of this conversation about that cross-border relation for the two territories. And this is the way that as part of these conversations, and Please move on to the next slide. So during these conversations, some topics were created when it comes to common topics, management strategies for the National Park of Purus, and also the river. And the result here did not stop there, so we started working on some things that were part of the possible agendas in order to work together on them. For example, the water quality, because there are some management points, for example, in Peru and other related to illegal mining. So for example, when it comes to contamination with mercury, something that we must take into consideration to see what we can do when it comes to water quality on the rivers, because these rivers are cross-border. In the case of Peru, as Guillermo said, the Acre River start in other locations and their source is in Brazil. So the analysis of water quality is something that resulted in a debate in order to think about that integrated management. So we also have something very important in order to analyze the incidence in the region. So we started working with some surveillance organisms that started placing some drug trafficking areas, and we also have that on the agenda because we wanted to approach all of this together, because as we said, we have the great parks, we have rivers which origin might be in Peru, so Brazil was something that we could develop or work on together. And we also have some alerts in relation to possible forest fires. And that is also something that we needed to analyze more narrowly between all the different managers that we have. And also important, we have the different indigenous people, because we have indeed an indigenous population, and part of it is the Mosquito group. And we've seen that inside the park, we have some settlements that have also been identified here near the border. And this is something that was considered important as part of this comprehensive agenda in order to take action. And something that also motivated these agendas was the Peruvian project that was part of this territory and is completely isolated from the rest of the country, and all rivers that get there have no connection with Peru. So this is a city where, as our colleague mentioned, we have that bill of law in order to create or build this road that could join this Esperanza with Empari. It was 10 to 15 kilometers distance. And I think that this is the dry line that we had in the map. So somehow we started with these discussions back in the 2012. And in 2013, we continued, as you can see here. This was the first exchange that took place in Brazil with the Secretariat of the Environment, and also different government managers from Brazil. And so we came up with some action strategies regarding all these topics that were also up for debate during this encounter that took place in 2013. And this motivated us to go to Peru in 2014. So we started expanding this action focus for all the representatives of the indigenous people as well. So we have some representation from Sinai, and in here we have a memorandum of understanding, something that we started working on, and it was ratified by the Minister of Culture in Peru. And I think that that memorandum of understanding was the focal point during our second meeting that took place in Esperanza, and we started organizing initiatives with the support of WWF, and we had many consultants and consultant meetings where we were able to analyze some of these territories in order to come up with actions with the different communities. And we also have a line of action and also an interinstitutional agreement considering different trainings with the institutions and also the support and in order to control threats and to have monitoring of indigenous land. So as you can see in these pictures, for example, to the left, as you can see on the upper left side, we have Rafael, Tiago, Jesus Rodriguez, our friends from Bolivia as well. And I think that I'm running out of time, but we have here Walter as well. And we also had some discussions about the action strategies in order to take action. And in here, we can see in a more concrete manner some of the things that we were able to accomplish. With the support from IAPA, we had different meetings, and these meetings resulted in consultation and analysis of water resources, governance, and to be able to come up with the development of a map for that area, which is, I would say, different. And in 2014, this is something that we could not conclude. So later on, something from FUNAI helped us. So because this memorandum was not completed, but now we have been able to take action, and currently we are analyzing a plan for the protected areas and to see how we can take this across the border, and to take a look at this from the outside. So from 2020, we have taken some concrete action that are being currently taken place. And this is what we understand, that after many years of actions, we have several challenges, and slowly we are working on this integration process. And we understood that the work that we are currently conducting needed to go through all of these levels of management at the institutional level, and also in relation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of each of the countries. And I think that this made us feel more secure when it comes to governance and to learn how to act. And it's also important to understand that the management of these territories with thousands of hectares, for example, a park might have up to 1,000,000 hectares, and there is another one with thousands of hectares. So I think that the management of these areas is something serious. It is difficult, and this is a way of doing things in a comprehensive manner. So we need more resources in order to keep on working in a comprehensive manner, as I said. And we need to consider the indigenous land. And something that we also discovered is that in order to approach the indigenous territories, we need to work together with the government on all these topics. And we also understand that taking this to these indigenous territories is something really important when it comes to the management of the areas, and something that I think should also be a part of this, and we must advance on, is that all these managers should work together for example, managers from Peru, Brazil, and cross-border areas, common areas, because I think that all the managers should have comprehensive activities with us, for example, here in Brazil, and in order to analyze the different changes, because I think that if we are able to advance with these strategies, this is going to provide continuity to all of this. So, for example, in Minas Gerais, I wanted to share with you what we have been able to do throughout these years, aiming for the future and to provide continuity to all these strategies. Well, that is basically what I wanted to share with you. And I am here if you have any questions. So thank you again for your attention.
Thank you very much for your time and for sharing this opportunity with us. We are just over a few minutes, but we still have colleague Rafael from Peru. Rafael, are you there? Rafael, can you hear us? Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me? Hello, Rafael. How are you doing? Do you want to start sharing your screen?
Intentaré, pero creo que no permite.
I'll try, but I think it's not allowing me.
Bernardo, que por favor lo ponga como co-host.
If you don't have the option, please, Bernardo, as co-host. Bernardo, can you help us, please, assigning Rafael as co-host? Who do I have to assign as co? Rafael Pino. Maybe I can move on Rafael's slides. Yeah, that's another option. Rafael Pino is now assigned as a co-host. Done. Okay, no problem, but just to support you with the connection. So Stanley, in just a minute, I'm going to leverage to introduce Rafael. Rafael Pino Solano will speak next. He's from Peru, from a forestry engineer from La Molina University, has 20 years of experience. He's currently the chief of the Community Reserve Bureau of SENAC, the Ministry of the Environment of Peru, and he carries out work on the mitigation on the illegal felling of caoba in community forests. He has also worked on strengthening the surveillance committee in protected areas, and also in areas mainly related with the native communities and ancestral knowledge. So thank you very much, Rafael. If we can, in the next few minutes, please adapt and a little bit, we would appreciate it. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. We want to present a little bit of the efforts carried out. First of all, I wanted to tell you that this was a protected area of a community forest, meaning that this is an area that is connected to protecting the biological diversity in this part of the Amazon. And the main beneficiary should be the closest neighbors, the indigenous people, who in this case, it's 8 different indigenous people. Next slide, please.
Esta reserva comunal tiene una característica especial. Tiene un ámbito de...
In terms of governance and participation, the idea is to develop efforts with the executor of the administration contracts, meaning a civil association receives a contract to co-administrate together with us, together with the state, the reserve, the communal reserve. And in this case, it's called the Association Ecopurus. This gives way to constant participation with co-responsibility with the population. You can see here the physical foundation, meaning the geographic location of the territories. In light orange is the communal reserve. In dark green is the Alto Purus National Park. In gray, we have the buffer area close to the reserve. And then after this, we have the white part, which is other areas. And this map is now including as physical foundation the Brazilian territory and its different categories of use. We can see the area of the park. And here is areas like the National Forest of Purus, right? This landscape, binational landscape, makes it so that the chief of the reserve work together with the management committees. And this is why we have a committee that is overseen by the education sector here in the Purus province, and with the committee that is elected every 2 years with a new chairman and a new board of directors. Every 5 years, a new master plan is assessed and approved. It's currently in force until 2023. And this gives us the steer, the direction to head on, because this master plan is carried out, including the different opinions of both the indigenous people, but also the local governments, such as the municipalities, and also the originary government of Ucayali. And this allows us as first target to include the beneficiaries of the native communities. Next slide, please. The effort of the last 16, 17 years here in the protected areas of Purus, in the Alto Purus National Park, as mentioned by my colleague Flavia, so far it has encompassed in Tortuga Charapa, the Charapa turtle 4,000 specimens. And as far as birds, there's also another species of turtle that is 24,000, more than 100,000 specimens that have been freed to date in the basin of the Purus. And I mentioned this, and I put this on my screen as the second slide, because it's part of a display of decision-making by the indigenous leaders and also social local organizations and authorities from the Purus area to reclaim this species that is threatened of turtles in the cross-borders basin of the Purus River. Nowadays, we're seeing an increase in the population of all three species, both on the Peruvian side as well as on the Brazilian side. As part of the entrepreneurial projects, because a communal reserve needs to seek out benefits for the population, especially the population that lives close to the reserve, is to first of all give priority to local groups linked, may generate some type of trade with their own resources. And here I want to highlight the very important support that we've received technically from our colleagues in Bolivia and also the friends from the state of Acre, because they've really given us guidance on their own experiences. They've recommended documents, equipment. They've shared a lot of information with us that really, the result of this is that now we have a wasabi pulp with a local association. It's our own brand, and it's transforming the pulp of this fruit of the acai with the leadership of the indigenous people. So just like this example exists, we have several more, but I wanted to put this one first because I think it's the one that I feel that has more backup from the actual territory. Next slide, please. We also have other experiences. This is the last I see, the case of the large catfish. This is another important decision because the indigenous people, along with their local authorities and the region, etc., and also as part of the municipality, they've made the decision not only to fish in a traditional manner, and And instead of overlooking the conservation of the species, which is the large catfish, which is a highly sought after species, especially in this month of August, because that's when most of them are fished. And so what we're doing is establishing good hygiene practices, just like we're proposing a fishery management program. And we know that this fish travels through the Purus River from its spring in Brazil all the way here until the region of the national park. So it's another very important decision in the improvement of the quality of life of individuals, and also to seek entrepreneurial projects that can lead to better incomes or better sources of livelihood for the people. In this case, for the indigenous people, Sharanagua, who live on the borders of the river. This is the experience that I can share with you, and thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rafael, and to all of the colleagues from the MAP initiative that accompanied us today with this presentation. Thank you for the effort of meeting, organizing yourselves, which is an extra effort in organizing a presentation of a case study with colleagues from different countries and different institutions. So we really thank you for your effort. And well, if it's okay with you, we have a few minutes left for questions and answers. I'm going to grant the word to my colleague, Stanley Gredas, who can start the round with a few questions. Stanley, thank you, Christina. Thank you to both groups of lecturers. We've had a great presentation, and thanks for the effort of trying to compile this in the shortest time frame possible. And we know it's hard. We know because it involves a lot of different topics. We've seen two experiences with the same foundation, obviously bared on shared problems on the border. They're based on opportunities on the issue of production, like what was just mentioned a moment ago by Rafael, as far as shared resources, shared problems, and shared solutions as well, as mentioned by our colleague in the north on education, how we can support each other, and how, and this led us to reflect on how we can achieve synergies. Synergies to appropriately leverage these shared resources, combat these shared problems based on common solutions. Now, I'd like to ask both groups a few questions, or ask them to explain further a couple of topics. We'll have to do this very briefly. And unfortunately, we won't allow everyone to speak again and cover all topics again. So perhaps the person of the group that is more knowledgeable about the topic can answer the questions. Being very specific, we need very concrete answers, 1 minute or less, to tackle each one of the topics. The challenge will be management-wise, so that it doesn't take too much time away from us. If you have somewhere to write, please write. First topic. Several countries have, just a few years ago, signed the Leticia. What role is this Leticia agreement playing today in these environments that are trinational? Because this was supposed to be an agreement to kind of joint effort by different countries in these processes. So what happened? None of you mentioned the Leticia agreement. I don't remember having heard it, at least. Is it playing any part? What happened with this Leticia agreement? This Leticia agreement is the first topic. Second topic, obviously, the cost benefit of this device, because things like the MAP initiative have been going on for many years. And it's so interesting because the MAP initiative is an initiative that is based on social stakeholders. In the case of the North, like Gisela, is promoted by the National Park Directorate, but there are many other social stakeholders involved. And this requires a big effort and energy for all sectors involved. In the Amazon, it requires mobilizing people for a meeting in the Amazon. It's very difficult. And we know it because we do it. And we know that the greater cost in any event is precisely that logistic. And now, as you can see, the internet can truly support these processes. Who's paying the cost of these processes? How are these processes being financed? Where are the resources coming from to keep these processes alive along such long time frames? Costs. Leticia's costs. The third point, Gisela mentioned, the blank spaces on the maps did not envision protected areas. The joint groups. We know that Colombia is a country that has made a lot of progress in territory structuring, but Bolivia has also made a lot of effort along these lines. Ecuador also has made big efforts. And the efforts for territorial structuring have their own logic and methodology. And our efforts for planning that involve this territorial structuring from zoning perspective have another different logic. You've had an experience on how to harmonize these two logics? And do you have any recommendations? Anything specific that you can tell us? How to manage these two planning logics for the territory to be harmonized, to be worked jointly. Harmonization for the protection of the territory and of the nature, to manage an integrated planning of the territory. Fourth topic. All of you mentioned how far these territories are from the capital cities and the importance of taking decisions that are based on the territory. What level of centralization have you achieved, or have you strengthened with these processes to guarantee a much more effective governance and much more appropriate governance to allow making the right decisions at the right time based on these efforts? So these are the fourth topic. Leticia, costs, protected areas, planning, territorial planning, and decentralization. So we can start maybe with Colombia. Ready. Andres will mention something about the initiative. The Leticia agreement as such, since it's a relatively fresh topic, we started working on proceedings as part of developing our own planning efforts in the cross-borders topic, and on the issue of conservation as a focal point for the department. As part of this exercise, I already communicated with the person in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to start being a part of this effort. Likewise, Gisela has also spoken with these authorities, especially with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Everything related to cooperation between nations has to go through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and that's where sometimes we see delays in proposals. The topic of the participative effort will involve something that is being envisioned from the park's perspective, and will also involve developing the planning tool for departments by subregions, by association. And in the department, we will have the Association of Municipalities of the High Basin of the Putumayo River, and we would also have the association between three nations, Leguiza, which would favor because they have cultural identities that are similar, and it would help in working on this. as part of strengthening the planning at the territorial level, it involves also strengthening the operation of the institutions that are planning, such as governors and municipalities or secretariats for planning. So it's about re-engineering and involving international cooperation so that we may be able to seek out the right resources that go beyond the ones that we have. I think that with that, we answer connectivity from the ordinance perspective, and it also involves, since La Falla Park is related by different areas, which are the convergence areas that can be strengthened through digital centers or through the same methodology that they use in Ecuador. And this figure should be the focal point for centralization to help to manage the administrative or the park areas. I think that the gaps in planning exist everywhere because of a lack of structuring that exists between the different authorities and the incomplete planning effort, because most of these efforts are done behind a desk and not with the communities or working directly with the institutions. So in this exercise, the development of the plan for the departments, we're trying to find convergence between planning instruments in time frames and also in the programming of actions, and also to try to close these gaps, which is why the planning tool will be handled in different stages, because developing this for the department, where in reality they don't have the ability or real knowledge of planning, is quite a slow process. And I think that's it so far. Yeah, we've kind of divided ourselves to provide the response that Stanley mentioned. So with regards to the Leticia agreement, Putumayo is looking at the border issue. And as far as question number 2, what are the costs for these processes? Thank you for the question. So far, we've had $0, no support. So how have all of the workshops that you saw there been based on cooperation? Cooperation from whom? Between institutions. Nobody is doing a favor. Parks has its own duty. The municipalities has its own duties, and so on. What we've done here, we've linked the resources that we had. I want to invite everyone to run the risk of working together, because this truly allows decreasing costs and being more effective. Of course, mobilizing our efforts is complicated, especially if it's only for 80 or 150 people. We had a cooperation, and I want to mention the effort by our cooperators, our international cooperators. They focused on what the process needed, not what they needed. And for example, the process needed mobilization efforts, and that's what they did. Sometimes we think whether we're a fraction because we're a state institution. No, here we truly work in unison. Another thing that we want to mention is the multi-scalable efforts. And this is one of the topics that has allowed us. However, we haven't made all of the progress that we aspire to. We continue on. And the invitation we make today is for cooperators and projects involved, because I also wanted to mention, because of a project some time ago, we heard of the experience and they left without us, and we in the territory. And I wanted to say the people who are in the territory are the environmental defenders, who the local communities, as I mentioned it the other day, indigenous communities, farmer communities, the park rangers are the ones who are there every day. And they are the ones who are dying. I'm sorry if I insist so much on this topic, but when we speak of environmental defenders, we need to protect them. And academics too, who've also been in the territory and who also have been threatened because they've been working on protecting the environment. Everyone should be working on protecting the environment. The other topic is the gaps in the protected areas. And now I got the word to Amar. But the first thing that I need to focus on is that I'm part of the gaps. If I only look inward and I don't look at what's happening in the territorial planning, then I'm losing sight of the forest for the trees. If I keep and focusing on the plan and I say, oh, well, this is up to parks. No, we need to work together. And how have we done this? We've done this basically by developing a few guidelines, but also with supporting workshops, meaning we acknowledge the efforts of the municipalities and we escort them in the whole process. They don't have to be experts on the environment, right? But I am compelled to support them. And this is an important point. The environment is not just up to the workshops. All territorial development is environmental. So when they're talking about agricultural and farming, infrastructure, we all have to be involved. We will share a few of the guidelines, not just the guidelines, but also what we managed to do. Amaru is focusing on the fort, and then we're finished, Stanley. I know we have time. Go ahead, Amaru. Yes, microphone, Amaru. Your microphone is off. It's off. Well, this is one thing when you mention it's the issue of communications on the border. This is a pretty complex topic. Go ahead, Amaru. The microphone is off again. It's off.
Ya, gracias. Bueno, yo decía que realmente
I was saying that the planning of the development and the territorial development in the area and for different levels of the state, by province, canton, and municipality, they each have to develop their own territorial area, not just the use and management of the soil, which was based on the municipal level. So this, as a strategy, needs to be articulated with all of the strategic planning. And this is granted or focused under a perspective of decentralization of the state on each one of these authorities by the state. However, at the level of the municipalities that are settled along the border, there needs to be a different treatment. There needs to be a multi-level planning there and a territorial development that is multiple levels, because we're not thinking just of the territory anymore, of the canton anymore. We're thinking that we are bordering with other cultures, with other policies, with other challenges. And so we cannot treat the cities the same as the municipalities along the border. So that has to be dealt with differently and needs to be developed under the perspective of territorial ordering, other policies that allow transcending the border and that would allow looking at the protection of the environment under the needs of the communities. We cannot protect the environment if we have a focus only on agriculture or livestock. How can we do this? This cannot be done by decree. We need to look at the needs of each territory. So their territorial structuring needs to be grounded towards the territory that converges in all countries, that unite their efforts, and where we don't look at the administrative borders. We simply see harmonious development of the area. And we have it. The regulation exists at the internal level of every country, but not at the level that we're envisioning. And it has to come also from each one of the state authorities. In the case of Ecuador, the resources are limited to each one of the competencies. We can't tell the municipality of Putumayo, you build the roads. Irrigation systems, or better roadways, or better provincial. These are all up to other levels of the state. And so there, for example, Port of El Carmen needs to be developed as a port for trade, but we can't say, oh, this is up to the municipality only. Obviously, we need to analyze the need, but it cannot be done by the municipalities because that is not where the municipality can conduct its efforts. which is why we need to focus on the fact that territorial structuring needs to be according to the issues that we've identified from the perspective of protecting the environment and in harmony with the livelihood of human beings. Thank you, Amaru, Cesar Mauricio, and then we're done. I would like to add two things specifically. First of all, in light of the costs of participation in general, this effectively generates some expenses that are contemplated among the budgets, but that unfortunately public policies in general lack this information. They actually turn their head around when they look at this. Let's say one fundamental aspect of this is how are we envisioning this topic of strengthening the territory? And here we use a word frequently, which is technical assistance. As if I gave something to someone because they are in a specific condition and they're not understood as cooperation processes. So I think that as part of this outlook, if I generate capacities for technical cooperation, then things certainly will be based on innovation and in focus on reducing costs. And there are exercises where the state in Colombia can do important roles.
Frente a los temas de descentralización, el país, Colombia, ha avanzado en los últimos años en una, digamos, en una tendencia a regionalizar la política pública. Y eso se puede dar, por ejemplo, en la implementación del acuerdo de paz a través de los planes de desarrollo con enfoque territorial, que son de orden regional, todo el tema de la inclusión de áreas metropolitanas y la mirada de áreas metropolitanas, que es un asunto regional, en fin, todos los instrumentos, digamos, en materia no de esquemas, sino de figuras asociativas en general en el país. Pero existe un rezago grandísimo.
But there is this delay, for example, which we can say paradox, and it is that all other systems, for example, planning system, budget system, they are still handling this by responding to the needs of a political nature, and also in resistance to a new vision, for example, of the budget, and this planning model that is also used with a political purpose. So unless we overcome this particular aspect, for example, a restructuring, but a comprehensive restructuring of the government around this, it's going to be much more difficult. Thank you. That is it. Thank you for this trinational initiative. Guillermo, yes, well, in Bolivia, there's a constant fight between the political aspect and the civil aspect. You know about all these debate, and I think that this is a serious problem when it comes to the officers. For example, there's a change in the ministry, and all the new one are going to change, and they have to pay for their political favors, and they don't even have the minimum experience required when it comes to all of this. And I think that this is quite serious. And as Andres was saying, I think that this is quite recent. I think that we have another legal framework, which is interesting because we can work with other countries that are a part of the agreement, and when it comes to a quick exchange of information regarding processes that take place in the Amazon. And I think that this is fundamental as part of the legislative framework to approach you and be able to ask for information or provide information regarding the processes of interest. For example, now we have floods and fires and many other things. And the lack of support that we have when it comes to indigenous development and environmental impact and many other things. And we need to generate and provide information at the same time because I think that this is part of the legal framework that we have, and we also have different agreements. And when it comes to deforestation, I think that everything is quite expensive, and there's no clear manner of going about it, because I think that we will always have technical missions to try and reforest everything. So I guess that this is a useful tool for the time being for the exchange of information and to generate different or conduct studies. Yeah, I think that this is quite an abandoned area, mainly Bolivia. So how can we finance MAP, and how can we dedicate all this time, because we as generators do not receive anything for this initiative. So I think that we can generate contacts and ideas, which is also important. So through these mini maps, which is the work team, we can get some ideas, proposals, and projects, at least binational. And the generating group is going to try and get international contacts like NGOs, universities, and to try and mobilize all these proposals and to try to get the financing. And like what happened with the monitoring system of early alerts for this mini map, because we were able to present a project to ODCA and it was financed and completed. So I think that all of this is really important. It's important to have an initiative from all these projects. And thanks to this contact, maybe we can finance all of this, maybe not at government level, maybe, but I think that personal contacts that the managers might have are going to be useful, for example, from prior works that they have conducted in order to find for more cooperation. And it's not just about the execution of projects and telling us what to do, but we must respect the MAP initiative and the strength that it has when it comes to the work conducted and the participation of the civil society. And also have committees of people affected. So we need to come up with extraction plans for all the people that have suffered, for example, all those that are victims of disasters, for example. And I think that this type of projects should generate some interest when it comes to the experiences shared and also the information. But I think that all of these should be projects that are from bottom to top. And we must consider the community demands that have been articulated through these mini maps so that we can take them to the generating groups. And then we can find a sui generis financing, because this should be taken care of by the government, and this shouldn't be happening. I think that they should be the ones to finance the sustainable development projects, because this is all part of the project and they have the money to do it. However, this is not the case. And this lack of government presence is something that we must deal with. So this is what we do at MAP, and mainly on the Bolivian side, because we have the political instability, and also if it weren't for the support that we have gotten, for example, from Peru, I think that the situation would be even worse. And well, that's what we do when it comes to financing. And as for protected areas, I would like for Flavia and Rafael to talk more about all of this. And so maybe Flavia can talk about this. Well, I'm going to talk about a couple of things. The cost, because actually we have a WWF, and I think that their support has been vital when it comes to all the relations at the borders. And I think that we should have an institutional agreement with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs And the idea is to provide our own resources for these conservation areas and protected areas in order to have these initiatives. And once the government is able to provide more resources, then things would be more feasible, because sometimes they have resources for these protected areas, and also the financial support for this type of actions, because if they don't have these agreements in order to be able to secure all of these activities in a comprehensive management when it comes to cross-border areas. But I think that sometimes we have these types of agreements in Brazil, and I think that we need to implement all these resources, because, for example, when we have other programs, and as for the management plans and the mobilization in the territories, I think that if we are already on the third stage, and back in 2013 to 2016, the municipalities conducting all these land use plans, and I think that these are the plans for the territorial development, and this is a municipality, and in here we have something that is, it might not be so related to the plans that we have for this reserve and the different indigenous territories that are also part of the plan, because 60% of the municipalities pertain to protected areas. So I think that the expansion area, the urbanization area, do not contemplate those areas. So the management plan for this unit is something that can be supplemented. For example, in some cases, we have urban manuals, for example, for the Purus. And I think that all these principles are for the protected areas. So I think that a so-called management plan must consider discussion among the different groups, but I think that we have more challenges here when it comes to the management plan, because we have this rural expansion of businesses and places, and I think that this is going to result in a conflict for the management plan. And as for the other areas, one of our biggest challenges or threats, not only for Brazil, but for the whole territory, is the advance of this road that is going to join Esperança. And I think that this is a faraway area. This is far from Brazil, and there are too many difficulties in order to monitor this type of road. And I think that would resort in genocide, I would say, of the different species that inhabit there. But I think that this is an area that is committed to this reality. And I think that once we have this road, there might be other benefits. So somehow, well, that's what I can tell. Thank you. Yes, briefly, because my colleagues have already mentioned the dialogue, the conversation, and coming to agreements, and taking care of the different development plans for the territory that we currently have in Acre. And also in Peru, we have the same or similar policies, but the challenge would be how to make these development plans with the consent or the contribution in consensus with all the stakeholders. And I think that this is a challenge for all three countries. And on the other hand, I might add that much of the success of this way of territorial planning with protected areas, I think that many of these will depend on the way in which we convince local people, indigenous or not, because if they realize that a protected area is an opportunity in order to get more funds, more financing, or a better quality of life for their families, I think that this is going to be a demand for their democratically elected governors. But if they are not in favor of these areas and they think that they have to go through difficulties, I think that it's going to be much more difficult to have these land use plans. Thank you, Rafael. Thank you, everyone. I think that we need to end. We've been abusing the time, so I would like to ask all of you to turn on your camera so that we can take a screenshot of all the participants. We'll do that quickly. And well, I think we're coming to the end of today's conversation about the cross-border spaces and the role of these areas. So while we wait for Paula to take this screenshot, please keep on smiling. I know that it's been a long webinar, but please keep on smiling. I see Jessica combing her hair. Okay, I'm going to take the first screenshot. So please keep on smiling. So while she takes the pictures, I would like to invite you for next week to our last webinar about agreements with the communities to explore natural resources and hydrobiological resources. The case of these agreements for sustainable fishing of Ivancoche in Ecuador, and we'll also see other agreements for sustainable development in Irimagua in the Amazon, in Brazil. And we'll also see the area that we were just discussing, like Purus and all that area, for a case for the agreements in order to take advantage of the hydrobiological resources. So those are the cases for next week, and that will be the end. So it's been a pleasure having you here this morning. I apologize. The time the same. We'll start at 8 a.m. Costa Rican time and 9 a.m. Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. And at 10 a.m. in Acre, Manaus, Bolivia, Paraguay, 11. And 11 a.m. Paraguay, Argentina, and Eastern Brazil. So thank you again for your participation. I would like to thank all the speakers, today's and participants. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the weekend. Thank you, and until next time.